Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this IIEA webinar on Europe's climate goals, an agenda for prosperity and security with Ernst Vandenberghe, Director General of DG CLIMA at the European Commission. My name is Barry Colfer, and I'm the Director of Research at the Institute of International European Affairs. Thank you all very much for joining. Definitely not the Director General, slip of the tongue. This lecture is part of the Rethink Energy series, a discussion series on energy co-organised by the ESB and the IIEA. This work with ESB is one of our flagship programmes, and we are delighted to be continuing this relationship with ESB on this important theme. And thanks to ESB for their support throughout this year and every year. Before hearing from our speaker and our chair, I'm delighted to hand you over to Catherine Joyce O'Quailey, Policy and Regulation Manager at ESB, who will say a few words. Catherine.
Thank you, Barry. It's great to have the opportunity to be here today and to welcome Director General Ernst Vandenberghe to the Rethink Energy series. For those of you who don't know ESB, we're Ireland's largest energy company, established close to 100 years ago, and we operate across electricity generation, supply and transmission and distribution in Ireland, Northern Ireland and Great Britain. And climate action has been a core part of our strategy for the past 10 to 15 years. In turning to Ireland and the great progress made in renewables, that's 1,000 megawatts solar, 1,000 megawatts of storage, almost 5,000 megawatts of wind in Ireland, and it's all transported by over 160,000 kilometres of overhead wires to homes and businesses in Ireland. In reflecting on the past few years, the Green Deal's ambition of a climate-neutral EU by 2050 embodies the theme of today's talk on climate prosperity and security, the imperative of reducing emissions, decoupling economic growth from resources, and ensuring no one is left behind are fundamental for a prosperous EU. And DG CLIMA must be congratulated on its role in enshrining the 2050 climate law for a climate-neutral Europe. And from an energy perspective, this involves decarbonising the energy system and increasing the use of renewable energy sources. And the Green Deal principles align with ESB's strategic objectives as we work towards achieving a net zero electricity system by 2040. So in decarbonising electricity generation, the Green Deal has enabled accelerated permitting. ESB is steadily reducing the carbon intensity of the electricity we produce, a 46% reduction since 2015. Second, investing in a resilient, future-proof network. One of the core elements of the energy system integration strategy is better integrating grids to support renewable energy sources. And we look forward to proposals under the Green Industrial Deal and the Affordable Energy Action Plan to bring this forward. And at ESB, last year we invested 1.8 billion in an energy infrastructure system. And last, empowering customers and communities on their own journey to net zero. And this was reflected under REPowerEU to reduce dependence on fossil fuels and making rooftop solar heat pumps more accessible. 6 years on from the launch of the Green Deal, the world is now in a very different place, and climate action is increasingly competing with other priorities like security and cost competitiveness. But for Ireland, and as for Europe, our reasons to pursue a net zero energy system remain as compelling as ever. Ending our reliance on fossil fuels by building out renewables is not just about climate targets, it's a path to energy security in the long term. And enhancing the electricity network is not only essential for integrating renewables, it will also provide greater resilience. And measures to enhance energy efficiency and electrify heat and transport can deliver a host of benefits to consumers. Not only cost reductions, but more comfortable living spaces. To conclude, the technologies we need are largely there, and implementing measures such as those contained in the Net Zero Industry Act and others will be pivotal in developing the technologies of tomorrow. The technology framework is strong. The policy now, the priority should be to build on momentum and continue implementing at pace. So thank you, Director General Vandenberghe and Donna, for joining us today. I look forward to how the EU will take this ambition forward and the discussion that follows. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Barry. Thank you.
Gramáige, Catherine. Now it's only left to me to introduce you to our chair for this afternoon's meeting, Donna Gartland, who will formally introduce our speaker and take us away for the rest of the hour. So Donna Gartland is the CEO of CDEMA. CDEMA is a public body that works with local authorities and other stakeholders to improve energy efficiency and reduce emissions in Dublin. She is responsible for driving Kadema's strategy, providing direction, oversight, and leadership. Donna is also a member of the board of Kadema directors. Donna is known for driving the development of district heating in Ireland over the past 10 years and is a director at the Irish District Energy Association and Heatworks. Donna holds a BSc in Energy and Environmental Engineering and an MSc in Energy Systems Planning and Management. Donna, I should say, is also an active member of the Institute's Climate and Energy Group. Thanks for being with us, Donna, and over to you.
Thanks a million, Barry, and thanks for the invitation to host this afternoon's webinar. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to everyone joining us today online for the second event of the Rethink Energy Series 2025. It's brought to you by the ESB and the IIEA, so thank you to both for organising this event, very interesting event today. And we're delighted to be joined by Kurt Vandenberghe, Director General for Climate Action at the European Commission, for his presentation on Europe's climate goals, an agenda for prosperity and security. Mr. Vandenberghe was appointed Director General for DG CLIMA in January 2023, and from December 2019 to January 2023, he was the Green Deal and Health Advisor to President Ursula von der Leyen. Previously, he was Acting Director for Research and Innovation Outreach, Director for Policy and Programming, and Director for Climate Action and Resource Efficiency at DG Research and Innovation. So obviously, a hugely experienced speaker with us today. Some background housekeeping rules just before I hand over to Director General Vandenberghe. So he's going to speak to us for about 20 minutes, and then we'll go to a Q&A session with our online audience. So please do send in your questions using the Q&A function that you'll see on your screen. When you're sending in your questions, please do identify yourself and any affiliation so that we can identify where the questions are coming from. And feel free to send them in as and when they come to you during the session as well. And we'll come to them then once Mr. Vandenberghe has finished his presentation. A reminder that the presentation today and the Q&A are both on the record, and we are live streaming this afternoon's discussion. So warm welcome to everybody tuning in online via YouTube as well. And a reminder that if you are doing any kind of social media activity, to please tag the IIEA and the ESB so we can reshare and repost those comments. So without further ado, I'll hand over to yourself, Director General Vandenberghe, for your presentation.
So good afternoon to everyone, and big thanks to Donna, Barry, and Catherine for the kind introduction this afternoon, but also big thanks to the Institute for devoting some time and attention to the European Green Deal and the climate policy, which is at the heart of the European Green Deal. It may seem a bit strange and even awkward to discuss the future of climate policy at a time when everything seems to be changing. It's definitely a very different environment we face today than in 2019 when we launched the European Green Deal. So everything seems to be changing, except that one thing is not changing. It's climate change, which continues unabated. We have recently heard from a top executive at Allianz, the insurance company, that the climate crisis is on track to destroy capitalism. That's how the insurance world is looking at climate change. And many of the principles and values that have guaranteed peace and prosperity in the world for many decades now seem to be put into question when you think about the role of science in our society and in policy making, the value of the rule of law, the value also of multilateral collaboration in the world at global level, the notion of collective security, but also the value of solidarity with the most vulnerable. All these principles and values seem to be put into serious question these days. But what we are clearly observing from the climate policy area is that climate is the nexus where all these values and principles are coming together. And I'm saying all this by way of introduction to basically say that the European Union has every interest to stay the course on the European Green Deal and especially on its climate ambition. We will continue staying on course with the Green Deal. We will probably paint it less in dark green and call it more clean than green. We will most probably look more at the economics of it rather than the ecological dimension. And we will be preaching less and practicing more, but we will stay the course because it is becoming really existential for Europe and for the European Union, not only from an ecological point of view, but even maybe more so from an economic, security, and geopolitical point of view. Economically, because we see that there is a global race going on to net zero across the world, and the fact that the US is changing policy will not fundamentally change the clean energy and climate transition. It may slow it down, it may complicate it, but it will not change the fundamental course. When you look at what China is doing, for example, China is really the green superpower in the world these days. But it's also interesting to look at where today in the world is happening the most rapid growth in renewable energy. That is in the Gulf countries, those that are exporting oil and gas, notably to Europe. These countries are massively investing in renewable energy because they have made the assessment that this is economically the most efficient way of powering your economy. And obviously, these countries would love to keep Europe dependent on their oil and gas so that they have export revenues. That also means that continuing with our climate agenda or our decarbonization agenda is a security agenda for Europe because we are very dependent on imports of fossil fuels. In 2022, we paid an annual import bill for oil, gas, and coal of 640 billion euros in 1 year. That is 4 times the European Union annual budget. And still last year, we paid more than 400 billion euros for importing gas and oil. So it's a dependence that is threatening our security, our strategic autonomy, and it's a very costly dependence. It's also a security agenda from the point of view of the impacts of climate change that are growing by the day. We have published last year our first ever science-based European climate risk assessment report, from which it appears that Europe is warming at double the global rate of warming. So even if the world is able to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, Europe will have to live in the best circumstances with a climate that is 3 degrees warmer. What it means, ladies and gentlemen, and without wanting to scare you, is that the extreme weather events that we are currently seeing across the world, be it in Valencia or in Los Angeles, for example, these extreme weather events risk becoming the new normal within 15 to 20 years. And Europe, as other parts of the world, is not prepared for these coming climate risks. But as I said, it's also a geopolitical interest for Europe to continue staying on course, because what we will see happening increasingly in the world is that there will be 2 camps of countries. There will be, on the one hand, the fossilization camp, as I would call it, those that want to keep fossil in the economy as long and as much as possible. And on the other hand, the electrification camp. And I think it's pretty clear to everyone where the future of Europe should be. It's in the camp of electrification. And I refer to what Fatih Birol said of the International Energy Agency earlier this week in London, that electricity is the new oil. So also from a geopolitical point of view, it's very important that Europe is partnering up with all those other countries and economies in the world that see the potential value of electrification. And there, one of the big assets that Europe has is actually its predictability, its boredom in being very stable and predictable. This is becoming an asset increasingly, especially for investors, compared to what is happening across the Atlantic, for example. So we will continue to implement the European Green Deal, which we are really continuously designing as an agenda for modernizing Europe, modernizing our economy, modernizing our industry, so that it is better fit for a future that will be warmer, less secure, more uncertain, and also globally more competitive. I really would like to invite everyone to look at our European climate agenda as part of the European Green Deal as bringing a big innovation and investment shock to Europe and to our economy. It's an investment and innovation shock therapy that we have delayed for too long, and which is necessary if we want to grow our productivity levels in Europe and thereby strengthen our global competitiveness. And what you hear from this is that we are fully aligned with the report of Mr. Draghi, who basically said that decarbonization can and must be a driver of global competitiveness and of economic prosperity. And Mr. Draghi added a very important condition, namely that this will happen if all policies are aligned to the same goal. For us, it's very clear that the climate agenda, the decarbonization and resilience agenda, is an investment agenda. We have estimated on the basis of impact assessments that we can become and will become climate neutral and resilient by 2050. And if we have an additional investment of 2% of GDP by year, every year, between 2030 and 2050. We are currently at an investment rate of 22% of GDP in Europe, the same as in the United States, which is also at 22%. China is at 40% of investment level. And we will not argue that we need to go to Chinese proportions. That would be impossible and not very good policy. But increasing by 2% is difficult, but entirely doable. And actually, we have done this in the past, because if you look at investment rates in our economy in the 1970s, the then members of the European Economic Community had investment rates of 25 to 27%. So we have done it before, and we know that there is a lot of savings and money available in the European economy. We simply have to channel a lot of those savings now into productive investments. So what it means for us is first that we have to realize that the European Union is on track with this agenda. It may seem counterintuitive amid all the bleak media reports about Europe's economy, but actually, if you look at the indicators with a cool mind and a cool head, we're not doing badly at all. We have systematically decoupled our emissions from economic growth since 1990. We have now reduced our emissions by close to 40%, while our economy grew by 70%. And in 23, we have reduced emissions by a whopping more than 8% in 1 year, while at the same time, we see that unemployment is, according to Eurostat figures, now the lowest historically since 2005. Investment rates have picked up since 2019. We have seen a tripling of investment in clean energy, for example, with a little downward trend in 2024. But the first years of the Green Deal, we saw a big uptick in investment. Our trade surplus remains as big as ever, including in manufactured goods and in agriculture, by the way, to an extent that Mr. Trump has a big issue with it and wants to wipe out our export surplus in manufactured goods. And even if you look at our manufacturing index, it actually compares very well to that of the United States. Europe has deindustrialized much less than the United States. But it doesn't mean that everything is rosy, of course, quite to the contrary. Where we really have a big worry, a big problem in Europe is the role and the future of our energy-intensive industries. These are hurting big time. Not because of climate policy, I immediately add, but basically because of very high energy prices in Europe. And some are arguing that we have waited too long with implementing our Green Deal and our decarbonization policy. If we had done this much earlier, we would not be in this predicament today. But those industries are also hurting because of changing global market dynamics. China was our biggest customer, is now becoming our biggest competitor in this space. And we have also seen that many of these energy-intensive industries have not invested enough to modernize their plants and their assets for the future. So that is really where we have a worry and where we have to work. So what will we do now over the next 4 or 5 years during this von der Leyen II Commission? I would summarize it by 4 I's. The I's of implementation, industry, investment, and international cooperation. We have everything in place for achieving our targets, or climate targets for 2030, reducing emissions by at least 55%. We do this by a policy mix of measures where we put a price on carbon, we regulate where carbon pricing is not working fast enough, and we couple this with an environment that is conducive to investment, both from the public side, but also leveraging private investment. So what we now need to do is not to add any more rules to this, but implement what we have agreed for 2030. With simplification, wherever possible, to make the life of investors and economic operators as easy as possible, but without creating legal uncertainty about where we want to go. And secondly, paying more attention to the social dimension of this transition. There are many concerns among our public, which are often legitimate, about the cost and the feasibility of this transition. We need to address these concerns. Very often they also stem from political polarization or disinformation on social media, but it does not mean that we should not take these to heart and come with solutions. Secondly, industry, the eye of industry. We really need now a real industrial policy at European level. If we want to achieve our climate goals, but also keep our industries in Europe and make them globally competitive. And that is at the heart of the Clean Industrial Deal that we presented a couple of weeks ago, where we focus on keeping investments and mobilizing investments in energy-intensive industries and clean tech manufacturing in Europe. We know that for many of those companies and sectors, the challenge is no longer in the first place a technological or technical challenge. We know how to produce green steel, and we actually, with our innovation fund and the Commission, are investing in 2 green steel plants that will start producing green steel in Sweden next year. So it's not in the first place a technological challenge, it's in the first place a business case challenge to make sure that we offer those industries that are committed to invest in decarbonization and modernization in Europe, and thereby anchor their activities here, that they get a special treatment so that they will have a return on investment for the next 20, 30 years. And that is the deal at the heart of the Clean Industrial Deal. If you are an energy intensive or you are a clean tech manufacturer and you invest in decarbonization in Europe, you will get a special treatment in terms of access to clean, affordable energy, making sure that there is an offtake for your green products that will be more expensive in the short term or in the transition period, access to risk capital and to financing to help de-risk your investment. That's why we have launched a proposal for an industrial decarbonization bank with 100 billion euros over 10 years to help de-risk those investments, but also giving economic security to those companies that invest here, so that they will not be undercut by unfair global competition. We also work on other issues like circularity and having the skills available for those companies. The third I is the I of investment. As I said, our climate agenda is an investment agenda, investing in modernization, but also investing in preparedness for the changing climate of the future, with the concept of resilience by design. And it's in that context that we will be coming soon with our proposal for an emission reduction target of 90% by 2040. This is becoming more and more an investment agenda rather than purely a climate agenda. It will offer the necessary predictability to investors that investors are rightly asking to make sure that they have certainty about their investments, which often take a time horizon of much more than 5 or 10 years, often 20, 30 years. And the last I is the I of international cooperation. We will need to do even more than before in working with all like-minded parties in the world to make sure that everyone benefits from and invests in this race to net zero. We believe it will be different than what we had imagined in 2019, because then we thought that green was the competitive advantage of Europe. We now see that we risk being overtaken by the likes of China and others if we are not already. So we will have to make sure that there is a level playing field for decarbonization and industrial decarbonization. We will do that by strongly promoting carbon pricing at global level. And there we are very, very encouraged by what is happening across the world now. We see an uptake of carbon pricing across the major emitters of the world, partly also triggered by our carbon border adjustment mechanism. But Brazil, for example, has legislated for an ETS that will be introduced as of next year. Japan will make its ETS compulsory for its industry as of next year. We are working very, very closely with China to firm up its ETS, and China has recently decided to bring steel, aluminium, and cement under their ETS. And we are really approached by many other parties in the world to help them set up a carbon pricing or even an emission trading system as we have in Europe. So this is very encouraging. There is one notable absentee from this, which is the United States, although this is only at federal level, because not later than Wednesday, for example, we had a good exchange with California that has an ETS, which is probably even more ambitious and wider in scope than that of the EU. And I can assure you that the likes of California, Washington State, but also other states in the United States are very, very committed to continue on their climate action as well. But we will also need to enter into more win-win partnerships with countries in the global south. That's why we will be designing clean trade and investment partnerships so that Europe has access to the raw materials it needs and the world needs for succeeding this clean energy transition. But not in a neo-colonial way at all. It has to be in a win-win partnership whereby we help those countries in the south to also climb the ladder of industrial development in a very sustainable manner, where we help them mobilize investment, help them with technology, help them by offering access to the European market for green products, not gray products, and in exchange also have for us access to the critical raw materials that we need. And obviously all this will come again to a head in Belém, Brazil, at COP30 in November at the end of this year, where we will have the COP on the Brazilian presidency, where we will see from all parties in the world, probably except the United States, what their national plans, their nationally determined contributions will be. And that will be a moment of truth for assessing whether the world is on track for the goals of the Paris Agreement. We are entering in a very intense climate diplomacy with all parties in the world to have the most ambitious indices possible, because we see increasingly that decarbonization and climate resilience is an agenda for prosperity. We want everyone in the world to prosper, but this can only be done if we have prosperity within planetary boundaries. So I'll conclude here, ladies and gentlemen, thanking you again for your interest this afternoon. I hope I have been able to give you a perspective, a broad view of how we see the climate policy today and in the future. We have a European climate law that says that Europe will become the first climate neutral and resilient continent by 2050. There are not many policy areas that have a policy perspective in law of 25 years. We have this in climate policy, and we will make sure that we deliver on that climate law. I hope I have been able to tell you and show to you that we have a pretty good idea of how to realize these goals in a very cost-efficient manner that preserves our prosperity and competitiveness. I must admit, there is one thing that we don't know yet, and that is how to help politicians get elected after they have taken the decisions that are necessary for us to move into that better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vandenberghe. That was a very comprehensive insight into the Commission's position at the moment. And in terms of politicians getting re-elected, I think there are a couple of Green Party colleagues on the call today from Ireland who probably feel that comment very close to heart. So just remind people that there are, the Q&A is open. There's a couple of questions in, but we do have over 100 participants on the call. So please do get your questions in. But just to start off, Kurt, I might just start with some kind of high-level questions around the Commission's mechanism, how the Commission will, I suppose, ensure that member states not only adopt but implement the policies needed to stay on track with only 15 years to go. I suppose, no country has kind of yet faced any fines for non-compliance for missing targets, and I suppose from an Irish perspective, we're facing some of the highest potential non-compliance costs. Our Climate Change Advisory Council just recently published a report that estimates those costs between 8 and 26 billion. So I think, this is a kind of a key issue from an Irish perspective. So, what kind of mechanisms are the Commission looking to most rely on? And, should we be waiting until 2030 to implement some of these fines? Or should, there be kind of interim fines implemented?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Donna. We are, as I said, we have an agenda of implementation ahead of us. So a lot of our energy goes into exactly this implementation. Part of the implementation is through national energy and climate plans, which member states had to submit to us earlier last year. And we are very encouraged by what we have seen in these national energy and climate plans. We will be publishing an assessment of these, what we call NECPs, next month. And you will see from there that we are actually on track for achieving our climate goals for 2030. That is also evident from the work we do with the 27 national administrations. They are all very committed, overwhelmed by the work, but committed to implement what has been agreed at European level. Everyone is facing an increasing difficulty of how to explain this to the public and to support political leaders in explaining this, because we really feel that we are in a situation where we have more or less the right policy framework in place, but explaining this in a situation where populists are very easily abusing the situation to polarize is not easy. I must also say that we are very encouraged by what we see through the emission trading system, for example. We are celebrating this year the 20th anniversary of the ETS. We have recorded an emission reduction of 50% in the ETS since 2005. And it has generated revenues to the member states of much more than 200 billion euros. Revenues then go back to member states, which they are reinvesting into industrial decarbonization and socially fair transition. So that is a system that really works. It's now almost automatic for the power system, the electricity generation. The next big stage now is the industry, industrial decarbonization. And that's why we have proposed the Clean Industrial Deal. Where it is more difficult is in decarbonization of housing, of road transport, and then also agriculture. These are three difficult sectors that we will need to tackle. For buildings and road transport, we now have a couple of measures in place at European level. For example, the extension of ETS to road transport and heating and cooling of buildings that will start in 27. It will be preceded by the implementation of a social climate fund, resourced by the revenues, the future revenues of this ETS extension, but to help make the most vulnerable households also benefit from this transition so that it is a socially responsible transition. And we have regulations like, for example, the CO2 standards on cars, which means that as from 2035, only net zero emission new vehicles can be put onto the market. But the jury is still out there, how firm we will be in this. So far, I see a very strong commitment, as I said, from the member states. It is true that in some areas of legislation, we have not seen the transposition yet of parts of European legislation, notably on the ETS extension. So we have sent letters to the member states, and we have started what we call an infringement procedure, which ultimately could result into fines. But I assure you, we are not in the business of maximizing fines. The more we can do to avoid having to collect fines, we will do that as much as possible. Last point is on agriculture. There we don't know yet exactly how to bring agriculture into our climate policy architecture. It is escaping from our climate policy architecture. It is a difficult sector to decarbonize, also because of the economic conditions it currently faces. But that is certainly something we will have to look at for after 2030. And that will be linked, of course, to the discussions on the multi-annual budget that the Commission will propose by July this year for after 2028.
Great, thank you very much. Just one, before I go to the audience, just one other question around, I mean, you mentioned, and it was interesting to hear, and I hadn't heard the statistic before, that I suppose Europe will face a higher, a 3 degrees future, even in a 1.5 degree global temperature rise. And you also mentioned how, I suppose, there's two camps. There's the electrification camp and the fossil fuel camp. And yeah, I think we're probably all in agreement on this call anyway, that the electrification camp is the way to go. But, you know, I suppose with the increased weather, you know, severe weather events and the vulnerability of a fully electrified system, for example, in Ireland, you know, we've had very, you know, extreme weather events in the last year, storms, overhead power lines, people out of, you know, out of power for weeks. So, I mean, can we both fully electrify and cope with these extreme weather events and the kind of pressures on the grid when it comes to, you know, extreme heat and cooling periods?
Yeah, I'm very happy you raised this question, Donna. We are not prepared for a warmer future with more extreme weather events. That does not mean that there should be an argument against electrification. Obviously, electrification means much more than just having more renewables. It's absolutely right that we need more investment in grids, more investment in storage solutions, also in flexible demand management. So it's a smartening, a modernization of our whole energy system that we basically need. But in doing these investments, we will have to make sure that these investments are also climate proof for a warmer future. And that is something we will do through the European Climate Adaptation Plan, which we will table next year, which will be aiming at not imposing new obligations on economic operators, but making sure that there is sufficient risk awareness and ownership on the part of all governments and regional and local authorities. Secondly, help sectors stress test their operations and their assets against a much warmer future. We believe that, for example, in France, where they are stress testing now their energy sector, but also their public health sector against a 4-degree warmer future, for example, is a good way to go, so that when you do investment, when you build a new grid, you know that it can withstand a much warmer future. We will also look at how we can help sectors be equipped with the necessary data and tools to do this kind of stress testing and climate proofing, downcasting a lot of the scenarios and models, for example, so that a company or a farmer in a certain region, for example, knows what a 3 or 4 degrees warmer future will mean for itself. We want to create increasingly a single European market for climate resilience solutions. There will be an enormous business opportunity there also for different sectors to come and adopt new solutions. And a last point, I think, which is important, is that we will need to find a new approach to investment in climate resilience and insurance, because we see increasingly from the insurance sector that it says it will withdraw from the insurance world because of the extreme weather events. It becomes uninsurable. That's why I mentioned Allianz at the start of my introduction and my intervention. So we will need to make sure that we work together with the member states and the private sector to make sure that there is still insurability in a world that will be impacted more and more by the effects of climate change. So it's a very, very important question that you raised.
Thank you, and thanks for that answer. We've got a good few questions in now, so I'm going to jump onto the audience Q&A here. Mr. Gerald Costello from Very Connect would like to ask, what plans are there with the EU to legislate for mandatory sustainability, climate change and biodiversity training within the business sector in each member state?
Well, I think one thing we are never accused of is of legislating too little. So we do not see the need and political context for imposing more obligations on companies or on institutions. It's rather the opposite trend we see. We need to make the life of businesses and companies easier, being very clear about the direction in which to go, but much less prescriptive in detail on how to do that. So when it comes to obligations for training, for example, I don't think that is a way that we would want to go. Whatever we can do to make sure that there is sufficient awareness in companies so that companies do it and see it in their self-interest to train people and to build capacity on decarbonization and climate resilience. That is something that we will certainly want to do, and maybe incentivizing this by giving higher funding from the European budget and or financial instruments for companies that do this, for example. That would be probably a better way to go in the current context than legislating to put additional obligations on economic operators.
Yes, yes, I think I would agree with that. I think a lot of particularly SMEs are feeling the pinch in terms of costs of mandatory legislation. So I'm just trying to keep a balance of the types of questions and the gender balance as well. Give some of the ladies in the audience a chance to ask some questions as well. So we're I'll go to there's a question here from Doris Alexander who's the Associate Director of European Engagement at Trinity College Dublin. She says, we hear now more about the clean industrial deal than perhaps the Green Deal. How can we ensure that social equity and community engagement remains as important focused inclusions in all that we do, as they are, of course, also necessary to underpin social cohesion in Europe? The transition must benefit all.
I could not agree more with Doris, and I take the occasion to say hello to Doris. We haven't seen each other for a long while. No, I think I mentioned the clean industrial deal because that is where there is a lot of concern these days about the competitiveness of our industries. But obviously, the social dimension remains as important. This transition will not succeed if it is not felt as being sufficiently fair and just. What we see in all our opinion polling work, Eurobarometers and others, and also scientific studies, is that by and large, 80% of the population in Europe and in other parts of the world, the industrialized world, are supportive of climate action. Everyone knows that this requires more work, more leadership, more effort, especially by governments. What is an obstacle, though, is that many of those people who are convinced of the need for more climate action are willing to do some sacrifice to pay something for climate action, but they are not convinced that others are willing to do the same. So there is the perception that the burden of this action will not be spread evenly across society. And that is where we need to find an answer, that this transition will be fair and will be such that the strongest shoulders will carry the most, and that we will not forget anyone, that we will not leave anyone behind. And there we are increasingly helping in this effort from the European level, of course, within the limits of what is our capacity and our resources. But we have already launched in 2020 the Just Transition Funds, for example, to make sure that regions that are very dependent on fossil-based industries and economic activities are not left behind, and that they are helped to invest in the economic activities of the future. We will start implementing this year, and preparations are in full swing, implementing the social climate funds, whereby we will, for the first time from the European level, address energy and transport poverty and help the most vulnerable households, but also micro enterprises, to have access to the benefits of the clean energy transition. There are schemes underway in France, for example, and increasingly taken up in other member states, for social leasing of electric vehicles, so that poor households who trade in or who don't have a petrol engine car, they have access for free to an electric vehicle produced in Europe. And in this way, we actually have a triple win, because we have an answer to the energy and transport poverty. We accelerate the deployment of clean tech manufactured in Europe, and we reach our climate goals. So that is something we will want to generalize more and more. And then a third element, I think, in the social dimension is the skills, making sure that people are skilled, reskilled, upskilled, because there will have to be transfer between different economic sectors. And as I said, unemployment is the lowest since 20 years. There are many sectors where there is a skills gap. So we have to make sure that the sectors of the future benefit from people coming with the skills from other sectors that maybe will have less of a certain future. And I'm pretty convinced if we can work on the regional dimension, the households dimension, and the skills dimension, that we can have this socially fair transition.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think the skills gap is definitely felt in the Irish landscape. Anyway, I think we're the highest employment rates at the moment. And I know that was one of the, I suppose, the key kind of concerns around the Net Zero Industry Act as well. So there's a question here from a previous, one of our past ministers for energy and climate action, Mr. Denis Naughton. He'd like to ask you, Kurt, to elaborate on the EU's role in addressing some of our climate challenges, specifically the energy efficiency. So he refers to the energy efficiency losses globally are worth 4.6 trillion, and there's innovative technology applied to electricity cables alone could increase transmission efficiency by 85%, reducing energy waste and carbon emissions. But we're still awaiting a coordinated strategy across the EU to capitalize on such technologies.
Well, I'm not sure if we lack a strategy. We have the Energy Efficiency Directive, which has been agreed by all member states, which puts quite ambitious targets on every member state and different sectors of the economy to improve energy efficiency by 2030. I think we have a policy of energy efficiency first at European level. It is so ambitious that many member states are complaining about it. So we have to do what we can to make sure that energy efficiency pays off. We are in a different situation than that of the United States, which is increasingly going for energy abundance and energy dominance. They have, of course, as we all know, an endowment of fossil fuels, which we don't have. So our energy dominance will have to come from energy efficiency in Europe, but without killing economic activity. We will be helping this in different ways. One way from DG CLIMA, the department I have the pleasure of leading, is by the Innovation Fund that we run and the Future Industrial Decarbonization Bank. And we are working, for example, for a new pilot action at the end of this year for the decarbonization of industrial heat, where we will de-risk the investment that industries, big and small, will make in decarbonizing their heat processes, which will be a 1 billion euro investment in energy efficiency and the uptake of clean technologies. So there's much more to be said about this, but I can assure you that energy efficiency is top of mind in our policies. We will need to see, though, how we take this forward after 2030, towards 2050, in a way that rewards energy efficiency, but makes it much less prescriptive than it is experienced or perceived these days, because energy efficiency is getting increasingly a bad reputation because it comes with many detailed rules from the European Union, rightly or wrongly, but at least that is how it is perceived. And so we have to find a new approach in stimulating, promoting, even compelling energy efficiency, but without what is often perceived as stifling, prescriptive, detailed rules and regulations.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think we time probably for one question. We've just a couple of minutes left. And there's an interesting question here just around, I suppose, aviation. This is from Sorsha Tony. And she asks, can I ask the Commissioner if as we approach the expiry on the 31st of December 2026 of the derogation for international flights landing and leaving EU airports, do you envision the scope of aviation activities within the scope of the ETS, the reverting to the original scope, i.e. all flights, including international flights arriving and departing from an EU airport?
Yeah, tricky question. First, I should say that we have had a breakthrough recently in the shipping sector with an agreement at IMO earlier this month, which is very significant because for the first time at global level, we have reached an agreement on a measure for a fuel standard and a levy that will put global shipping on a path of decarbonization. So global agreements in the climate sphere are still possible and are happening. This is a good precedent, I think, for the aviation sector as well. The situation is such that domestic aviation is in ETS. The international journeys, half of the international journeys are also in ETS, but we have suspended this until the end of 2026 to give a chance to CORSIA, which is the multilateral global framework as part of ICAO, to deliver. We are, from the European Union, committed to make CORSIA work for decarbonization of aviation. As a matter of fact, we are the first jurisdiction in the world that has introduced CORSIA in its own legislative framework. So we will do what we can to make sure that CORSIA delivers on aviation decarbonization. But if this is not the case, if it is not delivering, then as an automatic rule in 2027, the ETS will apply to international aviation. So we will have to make a proposal to Council and Parliament to stop this from happening if we are sufficiently reassured and confident that CORSIA is a sufficiently convincing alternative to bringing international aviation or applying ETS to international aviation. And I guess we can all understand that this will be, in the current global context, not an easy discussion. Having said this, it is very clear that aviation is the one sector which continues to grow its emissions. And there is a growing realization that decarbonization is the license to grow for the aviation sector, not just in Europe, but also worldwide. So I hope that we will find a good solution for this sector as well.
Thank you very much. And I think we'll have to wrap up now. We're just gone past 2 o'clock. And thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks for all the questions. Anything that we didn't get to in the Q&A, we will pass on to Mr. Vandenburghe for his consideration. But again, just thank you for joining us today. I know you're a very busy agenda, and we look forward to your next LinkedIn update of all your activities this week. So again, thank you to the sponsors and the organisers for today, ESB and the IIEA, and we hope that everyone will join us for the next in the Rethink Energy series. Thank you very much.